This is a Power Platform community service announcement. We are here to make governance not suck.
Hey, it's Paul Colmsey here. Welcome to my fourth video in the series on the Center of Excellence Starter Kit for the Power Platform. As you can see, I'm dressed nicely again. That's because my wife was rather unimpressed at my attire in the last two videos, so decided to bring back that veneer of authoritativeness and wear a nice shirt. Okay, so the journey so far. The first video, we looked at the strategic intent and the purpose of COE, its direction and what it's there for. The second video, we then looked at the deployment and installation steps to get it in and running in your tenant and collecting some data. The previous video to this one, we then looked at the analytics and what you get out of the box in terms of decision-making tools and some of the insights you can get from an administrative point of view. And so now in this video, we're going to take it to that next step and do things a bit more actionable.
All right, this is a good time to quickly speak to the context of governance in this video because I'm quite focused in what I'm going to be talking about. But I'm going to draw your attention to something I said in the first video, and I want to reiterate it here because it's super important. COE is a starter kit, not a finishing kit. You do not finish by installing it. So if someone tells you that install COE, there you go, you're governing, that is not correct. And in fact, in this video, I would like you to take the ideas and apply it to your context. So change them, work with them, extend upon them. So what I'm showing you here is purely for example only. It's not designed for you to just take it exactly as is and slap it into your organization. Now, governance covers a wide variety of topics, and in fact, it's quite a misunderstood topic. It depends on things like your role or discipline. It also very much depends on the culture of your organization and your maturity in terms of digital transformation. So before I get any hate mail, very specifically, we are focusing on the automation aspects of governance. So for example, automatic archiving of apps that reach a certain use by date, getting users to tell you the impact analysis of the apps that they're building. So this is not end-to-end governance. This is purely operational governance with a focus on automation.
Recall in the last video, I showed, for example, how you can look at apps in the Power BI dashboard based on an archive score and make decisions around whether to archive or to delete apps. That's all well and good, and that will get you to a certain point. But how about taking it to the next step where you can do that automatically? How about notifying users when their apps don't meet certain criteria and having them fill in that criteria for you, like business justification, criticality, and so on. So that's what this session's all about. We're going to look at the governance tools. So with that, you know the drill. It's laptop time. Let's get to it.
I've just gone to the COE website briefly just to orient you around the focus for this video. It's the Govern section here. Now, the interesting thing about Govern is it has a section in itself. However, the admin section also has some governance things right out of the box. For example, if you go and have a look in the admin section, I would point out that the Power BI dashboard is particularly interesting because not only does it have the ability to quickly find apps based on criteria such as environment, maker, connector, archivability, and so on, but you can actually take effective action via the embedded Power Apps that are in there. So let's take a quick look at that before we dive deeper into the specific governance features. If I hover over this app called Test, which is looking a bit questionable, you can see it has an archive score of 4. It hasn't been modified since it was created. It's over 6 months old. It has some non-production words, i.e. test, and it's likely a template. And that's because there are other apps also called test. In any event, if I right-click on this app, choose drill through and go to app detail, this is where it takes me to the embedded Power App that allows me to do further administrative actions. So for example, I can come to this menu and click Archive, and in one click, that app can be archived to a configured SharePoint library with full version history. So we will need to set up a SharePoint site, but that's just one of a few prerequisites to get the rest of the governance features going. So this is our starting point. We're going to jump back to the documentation now and look at the prerequisites to get the rest of the governance features deployed. So we're back at the COE documentation website, and the area we need to focus on is the Set Up the COE Toolkit section in the menu, and the one we want is Set Up the Governance Components. This component has a set of prerequisites, and it's really important you go through these first before you do deployment. Now I'm going to assume that you're installing all of the various bits of the governance components. So let's just quickly go through a summary. We are going to need a SharePoint document library. That's the first prerequisite you're going to need. It's a run-of-the-mill document library. There's no fancy metadata or anything like that. You can even use the default document library if you want to. You will also need to create an Azure AD security group. This is a group for admins because there is a flow that finds any flows that meet certain criteria and then assigns ownership to that group and takes ownership away from the maker. Next, there are some environment variables to update. I'll scroll down. There are actually 5 of them that we need to do, including that SharePoint site that we created in the first step. Next, we have to ensure that our tenant is set up to run flow approvals. And finally, we activate the flows for the solution and then share the apps to our makers. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to assume that you've set up a SharePoint site and document library for your app archives. I'm going to assume that you've created an Active Directory security group for your admins. And finally, I am going to assume that you have created a dummy flow as per the documentation so that the underlying flow approval solution and the entities and other components have been deployed to this environment. All right, so we are back at our tenant and we are back at solutions, and like the other components of COE, our first thing to do is to click import, choose our file, and going back to our COE components, the one you want this time is called Audit Components, and at the time of recording this, it's 1.17. So you click open, next, and next again. Give it a couple of minutes for this to install. It shouldn't take as long as the core component solution. It's not quite as big as that one, but there's still a few bits inside it. All right, we have successfully imported the solution and we can quickly click refresh and let's see that the new solution is here. And yes, it is. All right, so if we crack open this solution and have a look inside, we can see some of the goodies. Once again, like the others, we have some flows. We also have this time a model-driven app, but that's not the only thing. We have a bunch of environment variables and we'll configure those in just one second. You can also see a Canvas app called the Developer Compliance Center. And at the bottom, you can also see a business process flow, which we'll look at a little bit later, and a couple of flows that need some post-installation setup, hence the name setup required in their name. So while we're here, let's set these environment variables. Now, this is done differently to the way the core solution works, and it'll probably in time behave more like the core solution. But rather than do it out at the solution level where it says there's one environment variable to be configured, we're going to do it in here and click each one. Our first one is the archive site URL SharePoint site. This is the site where all of your archived Canvas apps live. So I get rid of the default value that comes with the solution, paste my site, and click Save. Next, I'm going to do the archive folder environment variable. This is the name of the document library in the aforementioned SharePoint site where your archives are going to go. In my case, this is called COE archive. The next environment variable is called auto delete on archive. And this basically means that once an app has been successfully archived, it will automatically delete it. Now, this does not apply to the inbuilt Canvas app that we showed earlier in the video. This is only the automated archives. So I am going to live a little and change the default from no to yes. The next one is the Developer Compliance Center URL, and this actually refers to this component here, the Developer Compliance Center, which is a Canvas app which was deployed as part of the solution. If we quickly jump to the app list, you can see it right there, Developer Compliance Center. So all I need to do is get its URL, which I can do through the ellipsis into details and grab this web link. And when I come back to my environment variable, I simply click in here, I go to the default value, I paste it, and I click Save. Right, our lucky last environment variable is the Power Platform Admin Security Group. So this one here, you notice it is not a group name, it is a group object ID. So we need to get rid of the default one and go off and find the object ID of the security group that you previously made. Remember, I assume that you've made it. Now, just as a handy hint, you can go off to portal.azure.com, go and load up Azure Active Directory, go to groups, and you will find them listed. So here is Power Platform Admins, and you can see the object ID right here. This is what we're talking about. So back to my solution, let's put that object ID in, click Save. So that takes care of environment variables. Now it's time to make copies of these flows so that we can set them up and configure them with connections. This is very reminiscent of video 2 where we set up the core solution. We're going to go through the same essential process. So let's click on the first one, App Archive and Cleanup, check approvals. If I click that, the flow loads up and all I need to do is click Save As, and it will prompt me to create the connections if they don't already exist. And you can see in this example, I already have the connections I need, so I can simply click Continue. Consistent with what we did in video 2, I am going to prepend this with COE so that I know it's different from the one that comes with the solution, and click Save. Great, I can close this tab now, and I come back to the solution, and I'll do the same thing with this one, and these bottom two, but I'll just speed up the video so that you don't have to wait for me to do it. Now, I've just paused the fun music for 1 second because this is the one where it says setup required. We have got some more work to do after this. I'm going to take that away and I'm going to call it consistent with the others. However, I am going to come back soon and edit this flow as it states. All right, cool, we are done. If I click on my flows, we can see those new ones listed here and they haven't yet been enabled. Okay, enough setup has been done to the point where we can have a look at the fruits of our labors. I'm just going to go off to the wonderful world of Power Apps here and draw your attention to an app that will have appeared called the Developer Compliance Center. This app was in the solution that we just deployed earlier, and now it's time to run it. If I click this, it's going to load up a Canvas app. This Canvas app is designed for each app maker. So all of your makers in your organization will use this. For every app that this maker has created or owns, it will list them here. And if you look, there is a colored symbol that shows the level of compliance. And as you can imagine, red is completely not compliant and yellow is semi-compliant, but we're looking for green. Green is happiness. So from the maker's point of view, they will come in, pick an app, and you can probably see here that I'm logged in as the same account that deployed COE. So you're seeing all of the COE apps right now. Let's go to, for example, this one, access this app. Click details. This is the embedded Power App that we were using earlier, the one that allows you to do archive and various other things inside Power BI. Now, what the Compliance Center lets you do is it shows the user, hey, you have got only 2 of the 3 things needed for compliance. You've published it recently, that's a good thing, but we don't have a description for this app and we don't have support details. So we're talking about administrative controls here, not so much technical controls. On the right, the maker can now put in all of the things that make help desks' lives a lot easier, the justification for why this app was built, who accesses it and who shouldn't access it. What are the dependencies? Does this app use flows? Does this app connect to other data sources? And then things like, what's the business impact? Is it critical? Is it low risk? And if you say critical, it then says, have you provided a mitigation plan in case this app is unavailable? And there's the convenient attachment for you to do so. You can classify the data within it and you can put the app into a certain category. So this is what we mean by support details. All of this gets stored in the common data service with that app, which means all of this is available in the Power BI dashboards for you to use to be able to view and filter and see what applications you have. A terrific way to see what's going on in your broad application landscape and fully extensible to your specific needs. Now, from the admin perspective, they can come in to the Power Platform admin view. This was the model-driven app that we saw as part of the core component solution. We actually used it to set a few things up in previous videos. But now we can come into the apps section, and there is actually a special view here called the admin review view. And if we click on this, you will see any app that has been submitted by a maker for review. So you can see here, I did actually submit that Power Platform admin view for review. And from an administrative back of house point of view, a support person or an operations person or an architect can look at this app and come in, click it. There's some high level summary detail of the app. And in fact, if we go into audit, you'll see the details of what the maker put in, the business justification, the dependencies, access management, classification, and business impact. We now have that high level view. And we can come in here and go through a business process flow to validate that. We can go check if maker provided requirements. Yep, I'm happy with those requirements. Let's move to the next stage of the approval process. Cool. Let's assess the risk. I look at this app and I think to myself, it's pretty okay. I think the risk is minor. So I'll go with minor and I'll click next stage. So you can see that we're progressing through the approval process and it's writing this information back to the app record, which again is available in the COE dashboards for you to filter and slice and dice. But to finish off the process, we can say, are we happy with it in the app category collaboration? We say, no, this is the Power Platform admin view. That's a mistake. It's an IT administration app. Should it be in the app catalog? We'll come to the app catalog in a second, but just quickly, it provides makers a list of pre-existing apps that already exist that might save them reinventing the wheel. So are we going to say, is it in the app catalog? This one, no, this is an administrative app, but if this was like an end user app, potentially we'd put it in the app catalog so it's available for others to find. We'll finish this and we have now approved this app. So that is pretty much the validation and approval process where you can get users to help you provide that business justification and the visibility you need to then be able to suitably assess an app for both risk and suitability as a template for everybody else to use. Finally, back to setup. We go back to the flows. The flow we need to start this whole process off is this one, COE Compliance Detail Request. Let's have a quick look at this flow before we start it. So this flow is designed to run once a week and it uses a lot of the settings that we set up when we deployed the core solution in video 2. If you recall, we went through and set a whole bunch of settings like color scheme, logo, email address for administrators, URL for community, so on and so forth. This is all used here because this goes through and for each app, it checks, has the maker submitted business requirements? And if you haven't submitted business requirements, it's going to send you an email with a link to the Developer Compliance Center. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of how that end-to-end process works. For a more complete description of everything I just described, you can actually go to the COE documentation website and they take you through the whole example app auditing process end to end, covering the user's view, the administrator view, and the business process flow. Now, while we're at the documentation, let's quickly go back to the what's in the COE components overview and governance and look at some of the other goodies in here. So we've covered the sample audit process, the Developer Compliance Center, the flow for doing a compliance detail request email, and the business process flow for auditing resources. Let's have a quick look at these two, App Archive and Cleanup, Start Approval, Check Approval, and Model-Driven App. Okay, to understand this, we need to quickly jump back to flows and have a look at these two. One is called App Archive and Cleanup Start Approval, and one is called App Archive and Cleanup Check Approvals and Archive. Let's look at Start Approval really quick. Once again, it's a recurrence flow. So this one is set up by default to run at 10 o'clock every Monday. Don't forget to set it for your time zone. It grabs some details from the COE settings entity in relation to admin email. And then for each environment, it gets all apps. And for each app, it then checks if the app has been modified in the last X months. The reason it says X months is this is something that you can set. And you do that via the second parameter, get past time. You can see here that it defaults to 6 months. You can change it to 12, 18, 3, whatever suits you. So this is how users will get notified with an approval request to archive an app. Now, where the other flow comes in is when the user receives that approval request, either via an email or the Flow Approval app or the Flow site where you can handle your approvals. This flow is more complex because, among other things, it's the one that will actually take this app and save it to the SharePoint site. So this is now picking up on our environment variables when we deployed things and we set up the SharePoint site URL and document library name. This is the flow that uses it. So the gist of this flow is if the user has essentially approved the archival of an app, it performs several steps that involve downloading the MS app, putting it into the SharePoint library, then removing that app and cleaning up after itself. And finally, there is a model-driven app that lets you keep an eye on that whole archive and cleanup process. I don't have any in here right now because none of my apps are older than 6 months in this demo tenant, but you get the idea. It's also worth mentioning that you can pull this stuff into the Compliance Center Power BI dashboards and look at things that way as well, because the Compliance Center tracks all deleted apps and flows over time. So let's finish off our discussion on governance components by looking at these last two flows. They're quite similar to each other, so we'll probably just use one of them as the example. I think it's also really important to note that there is less of a need to use these than in the past, because these days in the DLP capability of Power Apps natively, you can now outright block connectors. These flows were written at a time when you could not do that, and that's effectively what they do. They will allow you to block access to apps and flows that leverage connectors that you have configured. So I like them from a learning flow perspective. They use some nice patterns, so we'll take a quick look, but we won't go too deep in them. Okay, let's do the flows. I suppose that's the one that's more likely to have use of connectors that you may be interested in blocking. Now, there is one thing they did when they built these flows. The disabled connector array, which is where you have to build and put in your connector names, it is empty by default, because if you run this thing and we had, for example, the SharePoint connector and the Office 365 users connector, you would make a whole bunch of people really unhappy because you'd inadvertently block them. So each connector that you wish to block is put in here in an array, and it would be connector name, something like this. And that is how you define the connectors to be blocked. The next chunk of the flow is all about creating an angry email to say that your use of this flow has been revoked because you have used an unapproved connector. So that's all about getting the stuff out of the settings entity. We then get the environments, we loop over each environment. For each environment, we list all flows. For each flow, we then go through, we get the details of the flow, we get the connections of the flow because that comes in. We filter out those connections by those defined ones that we put at the start of this flow. And if any of the flows match the connectors that are in the disallowed list, it will disable that flow pretty much then and there. And you can see these are all standard flow admin actions. So you can use flow to manage flow if you've never done that before.
Okay, we are done. Now, you know I love you all, but I've had enough. So this concludes our governance components video. And in the next and final video, we will look at the nurture components. These are the components all about community, building internal capability and a community of active makers, and hopefully some innovation in your organization. So until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave some comments. Also feel free to give us any insights from your exploration and use of COE thus far. But otherwise, I will see you in the next and final video. Bye.